action were testifying. They're survivors. Some of them were crying. The men running the Judiciary Committee were wearing pearls, fake pearls, as a means of mocking them. And this really happened about 2 weeks ago. Their pearls were fake. These pearls are real. At the center of each one of them is a little bit of grit. And around that grit grows a beautiful pearl, luminous. And that's what I think we're seeing in our wonderful candidates, Senator Gillibrand and all of them. We have grit, we have courage. We're here to do what needs to be done to take the country back.
Yes.
And I'm so grateful to you for being here to encourage all of us. We're so fortunate in Nevada to be an early state and to have our new caucus rules. And I just, before I finish, want to shout out, so you know, so many people who are here. Young Democrats, National Organization of Women, IATSE, our entertainment labor, and other campaign staff that I've worked with over the years. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you, Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Teresa. Moms are in action. Love it. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your fight. Thank you for your advocacy. Thank you for the Clark County Democrats. Thank you for being in the House. Thank you for all you have done for candidates for so long. Thank you for delivering Nevada over and over and over again for Democrats. Thank you for sending Jackie Rosen to the U.S. Senate. Thank you for getting that done. Next, by 2020, we are going to flip the Senate. We will join the House in a Democratic majority, and we will defeat Donald Trump. So, for those who don't know me, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm going to tell you then why I'm running for president, and then I'm going to tell you why I'm going to win. Okay? All right. So, for those who don't know me well, I got my start in politics in upstate New York a long time ago, when I was about 10 years old. And the first campaign headquarters I ever went to was with my grandmother. And it was a hot August day, and we were working on a campaign for someone that fall, and a lot of ladies sat in this campaign headquarters, and they were stuffing envelopes. And they had cotton shift dresses on, sleeveless, and as a 10-year-old girl, I'm mesmerized. I'm watching them, I'm looking at their arms, and I'm watching their arms jiggle back and forth as they stuff these envelopes. And in my brain, I'm thinking, I want to be just like them someday. Sure enough, I've got the same jiggle. So my memory of my grandmother was always about being a very self-actualized woman, a woman who wanted to be heard. And as a woman who came from very modest means, she never went to college, she worked every day of her life, and she was a secretary in our state legislature. And as a secretary back then, 75 years ago, of course, all the legislators were men, and all the support staff were women. And so if she wanted to have a say, she decided the best way to do it was to organize women, to organize all the women in the legislature and all the women in her community and get them involved in campaigns. And so they would begin to do door-to-door, stuff envelopes, make phone calls. And over time, these women actually had an impact. In fact, you could not get elected in Albany without the blessing of my grandmother and her lady friends. Yeah. Because they were the women who did all the work. And so I learned from her at a young age that grassroots activism matters, that what you do with your time matters, and that you can actually make a difference. I always aspired to public service. In fact, when I was about 7 years old, my sister, my cousin, and I talked about what we wanted to be when we grew up. My sister wanted to be an actress. She, in fact, became an actor off Broadway. My cousin did not become a flight attendant. She wanted to be a flight attendant. She did not become a flight attendant. I said I wanted to be a senator. Now, I did not know what a senator was, but I knew that a senator would have big ideas and do bold things. I did not admit that to myself for 30 years because, like a lot of other young girls, you lose that girlhood bravado over time. And so I never admitted again that I wanted to be in elective office, that I wanted to run for office. And in fact, I winded up going to law school. I followed my mother's path. She was a lawyer. She was one of only 3 women in her law school class. In fact, she was such a role model for me and my girlfriends. 5 out of 6 of my best girlfriends became lawyers because she was the one who worked outside the home. And she was a woman who was also, just like my grandmother, very self-confident. By the time she was my age, she was a second-degree black belt in karate. Now, my mother was a woman who loved to make clothes, she made our food, she liked to make pies. She cooked the Thanksgiving turkey every year, but she also shot the Thanksgiving turkey. So that's the kind of household I grew up in. And so I wind up following her footsteps. I go off to practice law. I'm in New York City, and I notice that our first lady goes to China. And it's when Hillary Clinton went and she stood on that stage in Beijing and she said, women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. And once and for all. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, I really wished I was there. And in fact, I was thinking, why wasn't I invited? And I was upset because I was an Asian studies major at Dartmouth. I learned how to speak Mandarin from dorms in Beijing. So a women's rights conference in Beijing and I'm not invited? I was really upset. And I realized I wasn't invited because I wasn't involved in politics as an adult. So that was the first moment when I said, I really want to get involved. And so I got involved. I started working on campaigns. I joined a women's group, the Women's Leadership Forum. I learned about all types of how to help presidential campaigns and gubernatorial campaigns. And the more I got involved, the more I wanted to be doing it full time. So that's when I finally decided I want to do public service full time. And sometimes, even though you decide that, it's not so easy. So I tried all sorts of things. I tried to go work at the U.S. Attorney's Office. I didn't get the job. I tried to go work at a bunch of charities. I didn't even get an interview. I then said, oh, Hillary's running for Senate, my big chance. I'm going to go work on her campaign. I had no relevant experience. And so I couldn't find my way until I went to this one big Dem event, and Andrew Cuomo, the Secretary of HUD, was talking about public service being important. And so I trot up to him afterwards and I said, well, Mr. Secretary, I think politics is an insider's game and I don't know how to get from A to B. And Andrew, being provocative, said, well, will you move to Washington? Now, I had no intention of ever moving to Washington. I had this really nice boyfriend and a great job, but I said, yes. And so, sure enough, I get invited for an interview a couple days later. I go down, I get a job as his special counsel. I come home that night and I talk to my then boyfriend, now husband, Jonathan. And for whatever reason, God puts you with the right person, and Jonathan has always been that person for me. And I just said, what do you think? I got this job offer, should I go? What about us? And Jonathan just said, listen, your fancy law firm does not need you. I will see you on weekends, go. It's all you've ever wanted to do since I've known you is public service. Yeah. So 2 weeks later, I moved to Washington. And I start working at HUD, and I get out of bed every day, jumping out of bed. I'm so excited because I finally feel like I found my calling. Public service is for me. And I love this job, but it only lasted 7 months. Bush v. Gore, we lost all the appointed seats. You know, the funny thing about being a young staffer in Washington after Bush v. Gore is the way the Democrats responded to that loss was really funny. They took the W's off of every keyboard at HUD. They literally just took the W's off so they couldn't type in their boss's name, George W. Bush. I did not do that. So I come back to New York, and true fact, absence made the heart grow fonder. Jonathan and I got engaged. And so then I was thinking about, well, how am I going to pursue public service again? And so that's when I said to him, honey, how would you feel about maybe moving back home where I'm from, to upstate New York? And how would you feel about maybe running for office someday? And he said, sure. And the really interesting thing about that is he just got his MBA, was doing venture capital in New York City. Do you know how much venture capital is in upstate New York? None. So he really loved me. He really did. And so off we went to upstate New York. A few years later, I did run for office, and I actually won. But this race for Congress is interesting, and it goes to why I'm going to win this election, and it's going to go to how I'm going to win. When I looked at running for this district, I called a friend of mine who was a pollster. His name's Jeffrey. He's actually my pollster today. And I said, Jeffrey, look up this district. Tell me, can I win this seat in Congress? He looks it up and he says, no. I said, really? I've been helping candidates for 10 years now. I can raise money. I'll raise $2 million. I'll get my message out. And he said, I'm sorry, Kirsten, it's 2-1 Republican. You can't win the district. There's not enough Democrats. I said, well, you know, what happens if I run a perfect campaign? Clearly I can win then, right? He said, no. He said, there are more cows than Democrats in your district. You actually can't win your district. And being frustrated and being a lawyer, I said, well, what happens if this guy gets indicted? Clearly I can win the campaign then, right? And he said, well, it depends what he gets indicted for. So that was my district. Red, 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 red. The only person who thought I could win was my mother, of course. And I did. I ran the almost perfect campaign. I raised more than $2 million, and miracles do happen. I beat him by 6 points. Now, the funny thing about this is he never took me seriously. His biggest mistake was he never took me seriously. And in fact, he looked at me and said, she's just another pretty face. I, of course, said, thank you. And then started talking about the policy issues, like getting out of Iraq and Medicare for all. I ran on Medicare for all in a 2-to-1 Republican district and won. Because even back then, people couldn't afford health care. Even back then, their co-pays, deductibles, and monthly premiums were too expensive. And so if you just said to someone, would it be all right if you could just buy it at a percent you could afford and create competition in the system? And overwhelmingly, people said, yeah, that actually makes really good sense. So I ran. I ran for re-election 2 years later, and the Republican Party said, it was a fluke. She should have never won. There's no way she's going to win again. We're going to run the perfect campaign, the perfect candidate, and in fact, we'll pick a self-funder. The self-funder decides I'm going to spend $7 million in a sleepy upstate New York congressional district. That's a lot of money. He also decides to run very harsh negative ads. And they're really negative. They're pictures of me with flames coming out of my head, a red wash on my face, and the dark voice saying, she's not who you think she is. Now, the funny thing about this campaign is I'm walking around the district with my toddler, Theo, who's now 4. I was pregnant during half of the first term in office, so walking around with an infant, Henry. And we learned something that's true about politics. You actually cannot win a congressional campaign with negative ads against a young mother with an infant and a toddler. Because the truth is, no one believes you. I beat him by 24 points.
Yeah.
Wow. So it was quite a victory. And it did catch the notice of our then governor, David Patterson. And when Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State, he wanted someone who could represent the whole state. He loved the fact that I was from upstate New York and had represented this red district, but he also loved the fact that I'd been a lawyer in New York City for 10 years and understood what was happening with the financial collapse. And so I was appointed, and I had this opportunity to serve the whole state. I ran for election in 10, 12, and 18. And in those 3 elections, I had the highest vote total in the history of New York State at 72%. Now this is relevant because the reason why my vote total is so high is because I'm able to win the red places, the purple places, and the blue places. Higher margins than anyone ever, more than President Obama even, more than any person who's ever won statewide. And so I believe I can do that in the rest of the country. I believe that because of my experience, and because of who I am, that I have the courage and the conviction and the tenacity to bring this country back together. We need a president who's going to be brave enough to take on the fights that no one else will take on. And that's what I've done. I was able to take on the Pentagon, to fight against sexual violence in the military, to fight against Don't Ask, Don't Tell, a corrosive policy that told men and women they couldn't serve based on who they love. I was brave enough to stand up to the banks and vote against the bailout, even though I'm a member of Congress from New York twice. Bold enough to stand up to Congress when they were engaging in insider trading and passing a law that said you actually can't engage in insider trading as a member of Congress. So I have been able to be brave and take on the fights that others won't, because that's who I am. I stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And I've been doing that ever since I've been in the Senate. And I reach across the aisle to pass major legislation. You have to find common ground, and I can work with anybody. In fact, the last bill I just passed unanimously, it started with me and Ted Cruz. I can really work with anybody. And that bill was to end sexual harassment in Congress, to change the rules. And so when we started working together, we got 30 senators to co-sponsor. The bill went to the Rules Committee. They amended it and put it on the floor. It passed unanimously. So that's how it's done, and that's what we need. We need someone who will break through, bring this country back together, because the truth is, President Trump is dividing us. He's divided us against every line, every religious line, every racial line, every socioeconomic line. He's dividing us and spewing hate and darkness throughout this country, and it is hurting us. It is hurting our character. It is hurting who we are as Americans. And that needs to be restored. We need to stand up for what we believe in. We stand up for immigration. We stand up to help refugees. When the Statue of Liberty stands in New York Harbor, she stands there for a reason. She says, send us your tired and your poor. Send us your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. She wants to say, we welcome you to our shores, not under President Trump. President Trump wants us to be afraid of our neighbors. He wants us to fear women and children coming to this country in desperation. In our best moments as a nation, we were not afraid. Can you even remember what it's like to be brave? Can you remember the last president that was brave? Doing the right thing for the right reasons. When John F. Kennedy said, I want to put a man on the moon in the next 10 years, not because it's easy, but because it's hard, he had a vision for something that actually was a measure of America's greatness. We should do the same thing today with the Green New Deal. Why not say we will have net zero carbon emissions in 10 years? We don't know if we can achieve that. President Kennedy didn't know if he could get the man on the moon, but he knew we should try. He knew it would be a measure of our excellence, what America can do, what's the possibility for our country. Let's dream big. Let's pass a Green New Deal. And it's common sense. It's very common sense. It's three things that all bipartisan: infrastructure, clean air, clean water, and green jobs. Couldn't be more common sense than that. So there is an opportunity for us to reclaim this democracy, for it to return to the hands of the people, to displace the special interests that control everything in Washington, the greed and corruption that makes it impossible to accomplish anything. We've been unable to pass any common sense gun reform despite slaughter after slaughter because the NRA has a chokehold on Washington. The NRA funds campaigns. The gun manufacturers are largely responsible for the NRA, and all they care about is gun sales. They want to sell that weapon to someone on the terror watch list. They want to sell a weapon to someone gravely mentally ill with a violent background. They want to sell a weapon to a teenager in Walmart. They want to sell a weapon to someone with a criminal violent record because they will oppose the universal background checks every time. They won't ban the bump stocks. They won't ban the assault rifles. They won't ban the large magazines because they want to sell more weapons at all costs. Profits is far more important to them than people. And that's the same old story. We hear that time and time again. We don't have health care as a right and not a privilege because we won't take on the insurance companies. We won't get lower prescription drug prices because we won't take on the drug companies. Each one of those things takes courage. It takes bravery. It takes a boldness that we've not seen out of Washington. I am the candidate who is brave enough and bold enough to do what is right because it's the right thing to do. Not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And I hope you will support my campaign for President of the United States. Questions, so ask away. Yeah, you'll call on people, Teresa.
Hi there, Senator Gillibrand. Thank you so much for coming to my host state of Nevada. It really means a lot to all of us here. My name is Stephanie Obendia, and I'm an ACLU Rights for All volunteer. Everybody's passionate about a certain issue. It might be women's reproductive rights, LGBT rights, public education, the environment. But what I've noticed is that for me, all of those issues can be really encompassed into one thing, and that's voting rights. In this last midterm election, we had some people in some states that were not able to cast their ballot because they had, due to technicalities in their voter registration application, or their absentee ballots were improperly handled. So if you were elected president, would you support a national law for same-day voter registration, which we already have in 17 states in the District of Columbia?
Absolutely. And I lead the voting rights bill in the Senate. It's a bill that I've worked on with John Lewis in the House. And it has about a dozen provisions of things that would make and secure our voting rights, but absolutely same-day registration. I would also have early voting in all states. I would have vote by mail in all states, and I would have online voter registration. Those are some common sense reforms that allow us to get that right to vote, but we we really have to actually invest in our local elections, because we have state legislatures and we have governors across this country that are trying to disenfranchise voters. Just look at Georgia. Look what Stacey Abrams had to go through just to get basic voting rights in her states and to protect the right to vote there. I believe she would have won that election but for voter disenfranchisement. So we do need to push back, and we have to push back on the local level in all jurisdictions and make sure our voting rights are secure. I would also add to that, we have to get money out of politics. We must have publicly funded elections, because the corrosive effect of money in politics destroys everything. It's why we can't get the common sense things done that are already bipartisan, because the corrosive effect of money. That's why I'm not taking corporate PAC checks, that's why I'm not having an individual super PAC, and it's why I'm not taking federal lobbyist money. Because we need to restore our democracy to you, the people, so that I am accountable only to you, and no one will worry that money somehow distorts outcomes, because today, it definitely does.
Hi, thank you, Senator. Welcome to Nevada. My name is Will. I'm an aspiring law student, and I want to ask you about federal courts. So one thing I'm extremely concerned about is we have Trump and the Senate GOP nominating these narrow-minded, elitist judges that threaten to roll back our rights. I really feel strongly we need fair-minded constitutionalist judges that sit on our federal courts, and I would like to hear, as president, what would be your criteria for nominating federal judges and justices to our federal courts all the way up to the Supreme Court?
Smart, honest, fair, qualified, basics, right? We don't really have that with President Trump. It's a challenge. One of the most egregious things he's done with Senator McConnell is stolen a Supreme Court justice from President Obama and basically given it to President Trump. That's Neil Gorsuch. So one of the challenges we have is a president who's really trying to change the trajectory of this country through the bench. One of the problems we have, one of the worst impacts of elections is that a president does get to choose his judiciary. I voted against more judicial nominees and cabinet nominees than any other Democrat in the U.S. Senate because most of his nominees are either unqualified or corrupt.
Hi, my name is I'm a grad student at Harvard, and I'm also a public school teacher, so education is really important to me. So as a woman of color and a teacher of color, I serve all students of color as well. So as president, what would you do to kind of fix the racial inequities in our education system? Because I haven't really seen that from Democrats or Republicans alike.
So you really hit on something that's pervasive throughout our whole country, which is institutional racism. And institutional racism can affect our healthcare system, our education system, our economy, and criminal justice. And you have to have real ideas to attack each instance. Because if you don't, you can never unleash the full potential of our economy. You can't unleash the full potential of America. And so it's a drag on our economy. So let's take education, because that's what you asked about. The first and most important thing you have to do is guarantee early childhood education for all young children. You have to be able to have access early because it starts your whole life. So you need universal pre-K as a starter, not just for the child, but also for the parent who needs to be in the workforce providing for her family or his family. So 1. 2, we should have affordable quality daycare. Daycares in this country are so exorbitant, a typical minimum wage worker or a low wage worker can't even touch it. So they're forced into informal care if they can find care at all. And then if informal care is unreliable and the person you leave your child with is sick, you're going to miss work that day. If you don't have sick days or vacation days, it may well mean you get fired and then you have to find another low-wage job. We call that the sticky floor. It's one of the reasons why 2/3 of minimum wage workers are women, because they do not have the care support they need. So I would guarantee early childhood education. Second, our public schools in too many states around this country are crumbling. They don't have the resources they need. Class sizes are too big. They don't have any after-school time or extracurriculars. They don't necessarily have arts. They don't have music. They don't even have gym. And that's because of a lack of resources. So there's a couple of things I would do. For states that don't guarantee every child gets the same amount of money in a public school, equalization, we should try to encourage states to divorce property taxes from school funding. And the reason is this: in some states, what happens is if you're a wealthy area, you have great public schools. If you're a low-income area, you don't, and it's not fair. So we need equalization of student investment. And one thing that the federal government can do is offset funding of schools by giving money for property, plant, and equipment, for just the hardware around a school. You can give money for technical support like computers and other high-tech training. You can give money for arts and music and gym. All of these things are extra. And so you can incentivize different behaviors in our public schools to make sure every child has a chance for a good public school. And then college, there's so many impediments. Affordability is one. If you are a person of color, you don't get equal pay for equal work. So once you get out of school, it takes you longer to pay back your debt. Because many communities of color have less financial means going to school, they tend to take on more debt. So a black woman in America has the highest student debt of any other group because she gets paid less and she has to take on more debt. So a couple of things. First, I would let everyone refinance their debt at the lowest rate for any debt. So today that'd be about 4%. All federal debt refinanced automatically at 4%. That puts about $15 billion right back into the economy. Second, I would tell any young person, if you are willing to do a year of public service, you get 2 years of community college or state school free. If you do 2 years of public service, you get 4 years free. It's an expansion of the GI Bill. And I would expand it to all public service opportunities. I'd expand it to healthcare, to education, to working with seniors, to the green jobs, or to military or first responders, all levels of public service. And programs like AmeriCorps do that already. They have young kids helping other kids after school with mentorships, with homework help, with Big Brother, Big Sister. They have young people helping seniors who are homebound. They have young people helping people who recover from disasters, natural disasters and flooding and wildfires. So I would love every kid in America to have the chance to do that service. I think that would go a long way to actually addressing the racism within the system today. And then the economy, which is fundamentally related. I would also fund full employment, meaning any person who is underemployed or unemployed could get the job training they need through an apprenticeship program, a not-for-profit, a community college, or a state school, into the industries that are growing. So they can learn the STEM field, so they can learn any skills that they need for jobs in the areas that they are. That will help the economy grow, and that will ultimately pay for itself.
Welcome to our state senator. Just wanted to ask, I know that for many of us Democrats, a big concern is winning against Trump in 2020. What would you say to the big number of people out there that believe that a woman cannot be President Trump?
I would say they're wrong. I would say they're very wrong. I really think what America's looking for is someone who has a bolder and better vision for this country. You know, when President Trump ran for office, he won for a lot of reasons, but I'll mention one. Like we can keep aside the Russians and Comey and a lot of other mischief in the election, but let's just talk about the one thing he did. He did run on being a disruptor. He said the system's rigged, there's no bad trade deals, and build a wall. So he had a combination of disrupting the system for people who feel left behind and his own racist dog whistle of a message, and that inspired different people for different reasons. But the first 2 points of the system's rigged and no bad trade deals, he was promising to blow up the system to help someone who feels left behind. And that's really still there. If you travel this country today, I can't tell you how many people feel left behind. They feel like the economy doesn't work for them. They feel like the system's deeply rigged. They have barriers in place like institutional racism where they actually can't get ahead no matter how hard they try. And so there's real impediments in people's lives that they want someone to actually believe exist and fight against. And so I believe the person that will beat Trump will have a bigger, bolder vision about what needs to happen in this country. I think we need to fight for health care as a right, not a privilege. I think we need to fight for better public schools and educational opportunities for everyone. everyone. I think we need to fight for an economy that grows and allows anybody to earn their way into the middle class. And I think we need to take on institutional racism. And if you're willing to do all those things, that will create a better vision for our future than what President Trump has been able to do. He promised no bad trade deals. What did he do? He created a trade war. So you talk to any agriculture, any farmer, any manufacturing in our country, and I've been to many, many states, they're suffering under President Trump's trade policies. I was just in Iowa earlier today, and you know their exports are corn and soy and pork and ethanol, and China's their #1 buyer. So when you're in a trade war with China and can't sell what you're growing and producing, it cripples your economy. So I think there's a lot of people out there who just want to know, what are you going to be able to do for me and my family? Are you going to fight for my family as hard as you would fight for your own? That is exactly who I am. So I don't think it matters whether you're a man or a woman or anything about you. It matters whether you will fight for other people's families as hard as you would fight for your own. And it matters that you listen and you understand and you absorb those fears and worries and anxieties and overcome them, and actually have a vision for how you will overcome that. That is what it will take to beat President Trump. It's not going to be the person who punches them the hardest in the face. I promise you. Just remember that last setting with President Trump, Chuck Schumer, and Nancy Pelosi. Who did you think won that discussion? Who was the one who came out on top?
Nancy Pelosi.
You know, I just think Nancy showed in that moment, because she said, don't define me, and no, we're not going to give you money for the wall. I thought Chuck was great too. But Nancy stood her own in a way that I don't think President Trump knew what to do with her. I don't think he knew what to say to her. I don't think he knew how to handle her. So I think his kryptonite is actually a strong woman who speaks her mind and does what's right. So that's why I think I am the best opponent against President Trump.
Hi. My name is Mary, and I have a question for you about a statement you made a couple of days ago that's bringing a lot of flack from the right. And it was that immigrants should have the right to pay into Social Security. And now all of the things that you're seeing for the past 2 days with your name on it from the right has to do with illegal aliens taking our Social Security from us.
Oh my God.
How do you respond to it, or do you? And my next question is, when do you expect to get your nickname from Trump?
Well, I don't know. He did once say something about me. He said, "Oh, she's just a lightweight." And I said, yes, I am a lightweight. So yeah, I don't really care what he says. But so to your question, I believe that this country has a rich history because of our immigrant background, because of our immigrant history. Immigrants were part of building this country. Our diversity has always been a strength. And this president has made us fear our neighbor, has made us fear refugees seeking our help, has locked up children in abandoned Walmarts in Texas, has locked up mommies and babies, separated parents from children. What he has done at our border is inhumane and outrageous. And we should be very angry. My view is we need comprehensive immigration reform. The way you have comprehensive immigration reform is you let the 10, 11 million people who are here now, working now, begin to buy into Social Security. Pay into Social Security, pay into taxes, pay into school taxes, pay their fair share, and over a 10-year period, they will earn their way into citizenship. Just like our comprehensive immigration reform bill that we passed in the Senate provided for. That is what comprehensive immigration reform looks like. And if you do that, if you let everyone buy in over the 10 years of their path, you're going to strengthen Social Security, you're going to create a bigger tax base, you're going to fund our public schools, and when they've earned their citizenship, they will have already bought in to our social safety net that will be there for them as a citizen. That is what the policy proposal is. They may not be smart enough to understand that. It's okay.